Welcome to AskPsychSessions with Marianne Lloyd, where we ask some of the best teachers we know questions from you, our audience. If you have a question or an idea for a conversation, please visit bit.ly/AskPsychSessions. That's bit.ly/AskPsychSessions. All one word, all lowercase. And here's our next question.
Thank you for joining us. Today I have two guests with me, KatieAnn Skogsberg from Center College and Ellen Carpenter from Virginia Commonwealth University. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So before we talk about our topic, which is specifications grading or SPECs grading, could you each just tell us a little bit about your research background and the kinds of classes you teach? If you want to say anything about Center or Virginia Commonwealth, maybe you should talk about your own institution, not switch on me. That'll confuse me. Ellen, why don't you go ahead first?
Certainly. Okay, so I am at Virginia Commonwealth University, VCU. It's located in Richmond, Virginia. We are an R1 institution. We have approximately 23,000 undergraduate students, a very prominent medical school, 4 graduate programs in psychology, 1,700 psychology majors. So that's probably about the size enrollment of KatieAnn's entire institution. Because we are an R1 and have so many undergraduate psych majors, we have what are called teaching faculty, and I'm one of those. So I focus so much of my energy on creating a quality learning experience for our students, and the research that I do dovetails with that. So scholarship of teaching and learning and specifications grading is one of the things I'm looking at right now.
Great. Thank you. KatieAnn.
Thanks. I'm at Center College, which is a private liberal arts college. So I'm almost the other end of the spectrum from Ellen. And we have even less students than you have majors. We have 1,400 students total. But we generally have about 50 behavioral neuroscience and psychology majors. When you combine those two, we have a graduating class of about 50 each year. But anyway, so I teach in both of the departments, although my designation is behavioral neuroscience. My background is and my research is in voluntary visual attention, and I use EEG to monitor patterns of brain activity while you're processing information. So I'm an ERPer, as they say. But recently, with the pandemic and everything, I have kind of returned to my roots. As an undergraduate, I did some research in learning and memory, and so I returned to that interest, and it's something that I'm now, trying to do a little collecting data on my interest, just like classes and things like that. And like Ellen, I just recently became interested in specifications grading. I had actually started it before the pandemic, and toying with it. The reason I became interested in it is that I was always frustrated at the end of the semester when I would give final exams and there were critical things that students who were going to still pass the class or even get B's or maybe A minuses in the class, that they didn't understand. Critical things that I wanted them to be able to understand to go on to higher level classes, or if they were never going to take another science class again, that they, demonstrated on the final that they still didn't know. And that was incredibly frustrating. And specifications grading seems to be a way to get at that so that you can make sure that they at least pass certain qualifications or certain specifications before they can pass the class.
All right. Thank you. So if you are experiencing a sense of familiarity around specifications grading, it's because you may have listened to an AskPsychSessions episode about a year ago with Erica Knowles, where she spoke about this, or maybe you listened to the long interview that Garth did with Linda Nielsen, who wrote the textbook on specifications grading. But I wanted to bring you two on because gratefully, KatieAnn started a Slack channel right before spring semester, sometime in fall semester. And I decided to try this. You all inspired me. And Ellen was also an active participant. So I thought we could talk in real time, just finished the semester, kind of about this, how it went. KatieAnn, you introduced why you decided to try it because you felt frustrated that students didn't know things you really wanted them to know at the end. Ellen, what made you decide to jump into SPECs?
Yeah, sure. So I forgot to mention, I'll add it now. I teach primarily learning, cognition, perception classes, environmental psychology when I'm able to at both the undergrad and the grad level. So I started SPECs grading last fall. With the pandemic pushed me to look for this avenue in both my undergrad and then in my grad classes this spring. So I have no surprise, I have large sections of students. I merged 2 sections of learning and cognition into a 250 student section. And I will have to say, I'm very fortunate to have an amazing grad teaching assistant to assist with the grading for a variety of reasons, but mostly focused on equity, so access to stable internet and integrity issues. I did not want to do multiple choice exams online. So therefore, I designed my course to be writing intensive. So a writing intensive course, 250 students during a pandemic. And that's how my students were going to demonstrate that they met the course objectives. So I needed a way that would be grader friendly, but I don't want this to come across as I adopted this simply because of grading reasons. Really, equity in the grading, when you're grading that many volumes, and mine aren't papers, they're what I call healthy paragraphs. Consistency in grading. If it's 25 points, and how does my grader or myself remember and determine, I took 2 points off this student for that and 3 points off with that. So kind of a fairness piece. And like KatieAnn said, we want students to grasp some basic concepts. So in a learning and cog class, do I want a student to understand 70% of classical conditioning? What does that even mean? No, I want them to understand the basics of classical conditioning to be able to demonstrate their understanding of the concept and find an application in their lived experience and convey it in a way that has decent sentence structure and, not more than one grammatical spelling error. And that specification is in there because we're all human. How many times have we posted an announcement that we read it back and are like, oops, should have proofread that one more time? Or for students whom English is not their first language, to acknowledge that, and they still have great ideas, but you can have one error slip. So that's one of the specifications. So in a nutshell, with a writing intensive course with a lot of students, I wanted a consistent, equitable way to grade them and straightforward that, if you meet these specifications, you get full credit. And if you don't meet them, guess what? You get to try again. And KatieAnn and I had different ways in which we managed resubmissions. I'm sure we'll get into that. I let them resubmit until the end of the semester. I think it also increased the quality of the student submissions. As one of them said very, very early on, I approached these assignments differently because I knew I had to meet specifications. So, better quality submissions and scaffolding for the students that needed it so that by the end, they knew how to write a good, healthy paragraph that demonstrated full understanding of the concept.
Great. Sounds dreamy. But a lot, right? Feeling grateful for my N in my courses. KatieAnn, did you want to add anything else about why you're a fan? Or maybe we can transition into some of the highlights, like reasons it's worth doing SPEC grading?
So I mentioned earlier about the fact that it's one way, and Ellen mentioned this as well, is one way to ensure that the students are actually learning and the material and mastering the material that you want them to. I use the specifications grading in both an introduction to psychology course and then a higher level sensation and perception class. It's a behavioral neuroscience class, so it's very neuroscience heavy. I thought it was nice that this method lent itself to both of these levels of classes. Like Ellen, when you think of equity with my intro to psych class, I had students that were first years that had come into college in the pandemic and really had no experience. And then I had seniors that were getting ready to graduate, and they're taking this as a general ed. And so I had a very wide range of students. And the nice thing about specifications grading is that everybody, they have the same criterion, but you can give them a broader range of flexibility. Everybody, has to meet the same criteria, but they can satisfy it in different ways. And so for the students that were new, again, I think the most important thing about specifications grading is having a really good rubric, because that it lets the students know what they need to do, and it makes it so much easier for you as well, for the grader. And it takes a lot of the pain out of grading. If you want to talk about highlights, one of the things that I always agonized over was, is this paper an 82 or an 85, or is it a 75, and how do you justify giving them a C and not a B? Anyway, we all know that pain, that agony of and what are they going to think? And just too much thought into it. With a good rubric and with specifications grading, if there's any one thing that they didn't meet the criteria on, you check the box, you send it back, and the students then know what they need to fix. I do provide a lot of feedback. And again, my N is pretty small. My biggest class is going to be 30. And this semester, my biggest class was 24. So I was able to give a lot of feedback, but I had, very specific terms. I wanted them to use 10 terms, and they had to apply them correctly and apply the concepts correctly. And if they didn't do that, then I could send it back to them and say, well, this, you didn't describe the unconditioned stimulus correctly, or you didn't apply the one that students always struggle with is positive punishment, right? and negative reinforcement and positive punishment. There's several assignments that I sent back for that. So you can send it back and ask them to correct it. And as Ellen mentioned, as the semester goes along, the work gets better. And there are fewer and fewer revisions for the most part. I think when I first started doing this, my concern was that the students would know that they would get another chance and that they would turn in junk just so that they could get feedback. And again, like Ellen said, we had similar experiences, even though we're in very different institutions. The students said, I did an informal survey at the end, and I got the same thing. I approached my assignments very differently because I knew that there were certain specifications that I had to meet. And if I didn't want to have to redo it, I had to do those things. And when they had to redo it, they knew what they needed to fix. And by the end of the semester, my students, this is trivial, but my students, I think they all knew how to do APA format correctly as far as references go. And this is in my intro to psych class. Yeah, they much less pain for upper level professors that are going to have those students, right? That's just one of the trivial things, but there were, it was something that was clear, delineated, easy for them to correct, and easy for me to identify. Same with like the definitions. So I think that was a little bit of a meandering answer to your question, but I really, the work got better as the semester went along. They didn't abuse the redos, except for towards the end of the semester, I had some students that were suddenly realizing that they weren't going to get the grade that they wanted. And so they were trying to do multiple redos. And when they do multiple redos, the quality didn't quite get there. And so even with their second chances, they didn't meet the bar. And so that was maybe, and again, in their reflections at the end, that I had several students say, don't wait until the end to try to do your redos. So.
And I want to tag off of something that Katie said, and it has to do with bundling. So we're talking about the quality of the submission meeting specs, but there's also a way to set it up of you need to do this many for an A, this many for a B, and this many for a C, or this many to just, pass the course, which, hey, for the graduating seniors, maybe that's what it is. And we sometimes have to let go of our assumptions about what grade a student is shooting for. So if a student is shooting for a C, wouldn't you rather grade 6 quality journals than then submitting all 12 that are due for the ones for an A, that they're just throwing spaghetti on a wall and seeing what sticks and seeing if they can get that 70%? No, I'd rather read 6, or 8, whatever the criteria is, good ones. And I also used that bundling for the grad class this spring, and I am so happy about that. Grad level teaching has been a huge challenge for me. There's just not as much literature out there. People just kind of teach it the way they taught it. They received it. And I don't want to just discuss articles and grade papers at the end. So I bundled SPECs grading into my grad course. And really, the expectations of what I always had is if you do all these, you get an A. And if you do fewer of them, you get a B. And most grad students are going to get the A, but we all know how much they are juggling. And so at some point, they might realize, a B is good enough in this class. Oh, that just means I lead 5 class discussions instead of 7. Or I do 1 project instead of 2. Instead of them stressing to do all 7 leading presentations and 2 projects and turning in not so stellar work that doesn't reflect their ability if they had time to dedicate to my class, which is a core requirement, but not, I admit, their number one priority. And that just took the pressure off of them. They were choosing to get the A and they did the work, and I just graded their journals as complete or not complete and just gave feedback on the content. So that worked splendidly at the grad level. I highly recommend it.
Great. Those are both great answers. And you ended up getting to things that I was wanting to make sure we talked about, although it occurs to me that we probably should have even started, because maybe not everyone listened to every episode in the past. That was a curse of knowledge error I made. So for those that aren't familiar with specifications grading, the idea is rather than things being worth points or partial points, you basically get credit for it or not. It's like your driver's test, right? You might be really good at turns, but if you can't parallel park, you don't get your license yet. Same idea. So I think that's important background knowledge for those that are not as familiar. So you're setting quite the rosy picture, but nothing is perfect. So can we talk a little bit about maybe what you realized were some potential pitfalls and what changes are you going to make for next semester? I realized some of the stuff you needed for an A, I started too late in the semester and students were very stressed. And I was ending up in a scenario where they weren't going to have time to redo, possibly. And therefore, and I get you can do work and not get an A, and that is a good life lesson, but I didn't necessarily think it was the time to have that life lesson. So yeah, that's an adjustment I'm making, kind of moving some things back in the semester. But what were some pitfalls and what are some changes that you're making? I'll move back to KatieAnn.
So there's a couple of things. Starting out, I overestimated what I thought the students could do. So I had to scale back my expectations about halfway through the semester. And they actually had to reach out to me and say, hey, this is too much. And so I think it's really important to get feedback from your students and incorporate their ideas, because it was still, like I say, I'm still new to it, and my expectations were a little too high. I also, trying to keep track of the redos, and this is something I know we've discussed in other venues, but trying to keep track of I actually had a token system to where they could earn second chances by completing additional assignments. And initially that seemed like a good idea, and then it became a monster to keep track of. And towards the end, I hit on an idea somebody had posted in one of our Facebook groups, and that they just have them fill out a form that generates a Google Doc that sends an email that tells them they've submitted something. It's like, that's brilliant. And you can keep track, you have it in Excel form. But I didn't discover that until the last 2 weeks of class. So I quit trying to track it. I just assumed that they had done the assignment, and I just gave them a second chance. I did regret doing that to a certain extent. At the end of the semester, I had an awful lot of students trying to, as I mentioned earlier, trying to redo assignments at the last minute when they realized that they were not going to get the grade that they thought they were after. And I also, it takes a lot to communicate. It's so different to the students. And this kind of bridging off of that, things at the end of the semester, realizing they weren't going to get the grade they wanted. At the beginning of the semester, they will react. If they haven't had it before, they'll be overwhelmed. There was a lot of resistance. It's too hard. You're asking me to be perfect. There's no way I can get this grade. And there's a lot of anxiety at the beginning. And I think that it requires a lot of communication to get them comfortable with the method. And it just takes some experience too. You just kind of have to tell them, you just have to do this to find out what it's like. And it's not like anything you've done before. So getting the buy-in, that's a challenge. And then also figuring out how you're going to do those. If you're going to give them second chances, how are you going to do that so that your grading doesn't pile up at the end of the semester? I'm still struggling with that, to tell you the truth, because from an equity standpoint and an access standpoint, I want to give students the opportunity to make up assignments. I had one student who had an illness that actually ended up being hospitalized, and was a great student and really did need, the opportunity to make up the assignments. And it was a student that was graduating, and they really wanted to be able to complete the requirements. And so and the syllabus allows for that student to redo multiple assignments, or actually even take late assignments and submit them. And so, in that case, I don't feel so bad. But then I had other students that were trying to do 4 and 5 redos, at the end of the semester. And it was a lot of work for me, and it was a lot of work for them. So I need to find a better way to manage that so that there's some flexibility. And that's still a work in progress.
Same. I was working on my syllabi yesterday for fall, and because I also had to be open-ended. I was like, I don't want to give you a deadline. I don't know what your life is like, which is, great for the students, like you mentioned, that are having challenges, but it is not great for the super procrastinators, right? It's in some ways reinforcing the behavior that they may be trying to adjust. So where I've landed for now is kind of, if it's a celebration of learning / exam, they have a week after I kind of previewed in class, like I didn't give direct answers, but I said, a common mistake was flipping mediators and moderators a week after that. But then I said, you may have additional challenges, please reach out. So I'm hoping that might be a balance. I'll report back in January for how that works. But I'm saying I spent so much time grading at the end of the semester, and when I'm tired too, right? I tell them you don't want a tired, angry person grading. You want, in this case, September, Marianne is very perky. Ellen, how about you?
Yeah, well, as I hear this, I think, gosh, maybe you should be interviewing my GTA rather than me. But no, at the end of the semester, I jump in and help grading because with 250 students and, those striving for an A are doing the 12 journals, and then they can also do podcasts, and there's other group work to be graded. But each individual graded assignment is, I would say, not very cognitively tiring to grade. So although volume was high, it wasn't very hard to go through and decide if it met specs or not. I would say for students' response, yes, it's something new. And as KatieAnn said, that messaging, that framing, that reinforcement that, you're going to be okay. And I frame it as, when you go out in the real world or grad school, it's not going to be all spelled out nice and clean for you. So I'm actually shifting that because it worked so well with a week 1 wrap up when I told them, you're going to be hit with situations that are new and ambiguous, and you're going to have to figure it out. So practice it here. And then they wrote in their responses, thank you for giving me this opportunity to learn how to do this. So I need to make that a formal course objective. You'll start out with ambiguous things and we'll figure it out. But seriously, they get worried. They hear and read the all or none. And it's like some of them shut down and don't hear, but you get to keep resubmitting because that is just not how K-12 and their first few years of college worked. So to be like, I'm not going to pass you along because you missed some main things, but guess what? You can just keep redoing it until you get those things. So my GTA and I have learned that besides that initial messaging, when the first round of grading comes out, to say, some of you that have never gotten a 0 before have experienced your first 0. And we get that can be disappointing and humiliating. But we're here to tell you that it just hasn't met specs yet. And so really emphasize that if you're willing to look at it again, we're willing to look at it again, and we'll just keep doing it until you get that grade that you're satisfied with. And as far as figuring out how many they need to do, it sounds like some of the discussion that we've been having is, how do I not make it too impossible? I worked back from when I had taught this course before specs, and there were this number assigned journal entries. So I just kept that number for an A and then worked back percentages. Okay, so a B would be doing this many and a C would be doing this many, and just barely scraping by would be this many. That seems to have worked. My point scale, because this is, I've been told, an off-the-rails course design, kind of gamified it. They're just going for points. So sometimes students look at the amount of points and say, that's way too many points. But really, I just multiplied out from what it was like when it was a standard course. So much of it is the messaging and the packaging. That's probably one of the biggest things I've learned over the years. I spend all summer constructing, this is going to be amazing, but I've been thinking about it 24/7 for 3 months. So it all makes sense to me and is straightforward. And it's just like foreign to them when they see it. And if you explain the why, that just helps so much. So Psych Sessions is actually part of the list of podcasts they can choose from. Maybe I have some of my students who are going to be listening to this in the future. Maybe they'll understand the why a little bit better than how I present it to them.
Great. Thank you. We are coming up on our normal, finishing time of around half an hour, but I always like for guests to have a chance if there's something that I didn't ask, or that you would like to add, or a pitch you'd like to make, preferably about specs grading, although I can edit, I guess, if you choose to tell me about, your e-published novel that's on Amazon as well. Might be interesting. So KatieAnn, you want to add anything to wrap us up?
I I guess the only thing I would add is that we do seem to have a spontaneously lively, and by that I mean on occasion, discussion on the Slack channel, and people who are interested in learning more about this are welcome to join that. And I've gotten some great feedback and ideas from you all, and I don't know if there's a way to put a link to that or not, or you can find us through the STP Facebook group. We've put a couple of posts up there. So that may be, people are welcome to join us on the Slack channel. And I'm still learning, and I think Ellen and I are working on presentations and maybe a paper on this. So it's still a work in progress, but something I really do want to explore more of.
Great. Thank you. And Ellen.
Yeah, and I'd like to thank KatieAnn for first lending me the Nilsson book, the hard copy, which I eventually mailed back to her, right? That's like the Bible of it. So I do recommend individuals looking into that as a source. Something else to think about, you don't have to jump in heels first, go in over your head and design your whole course with SPEC grading. If you're thinking about it, you can just pick one little assignment and start with it and build from there. But I would echo what KatieAnn said. The community that she's built on the Slack channel and, of course, our STP page, we have so much support. You ask a question and you get so many great ideas, and you find out that everybody else's students are responding the same way as yours. And there's that just great camaraderie. Our students have no idea that we are constantly working to up our game, to give them this great, phenomenal experience. They have no idea that we have this army of support helping us get to when we deliver that new fresh and exciting course, because it's always fresh and exciting when we create it. And then we get to dissect it. So I want to thank you, Marianne, for this opportunity for us to hash out how this went. And it's an ongoing work in progress.
That is true for SPECs and teaching. So thank you both, and I wish you a restorative summer. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.